Hi, everybody. Welcome to another thrilling edition. I'm your host, Jay Jennings, and we've got a special show this week. And usually we cover films that were released intact, but this special show is going to be called Deleted Scenes in Classic Horror Films, which is always fun. Scenes that didn't make the final cut due to perhaps code violations, or the studio wanted to cut it out. They didn't think it was relevant. Or maybe 50, 60 years later, they did put it back, the scenes that we're going to talk about, and they are in the final version in VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray. And as always, to help discuss all of those things is the great film historian, director, writer, Courtney Joyner. Hey, Court.
This is a subject that's pretty close to my heart because there were always, if you will, stills and things and like famous monsters or Castle of Frankenstein or whatever, and you go, wow, look at that. And then when you finally see the movie, it wasn't there. And you're always left scratching your head. This wasn't really a deleted scene, but there was a wonderful shot of Vincent Price dissolving into goo while strangling Basil Rathbone in the case of M. Valdemar and Tales of Terror. I saw that movie in the movie theater, and Vincent, that's all done through a series of lap dissolves, and that great still of him strangling Rathbone isn't in the film.
Okay, we're going to talk about the first movie, was Frankenstein, 1931, and in that particular scene, it's one of the most famous scenes of all time that was missing, I think, close to 50 or 60 years. And that's, of course, the monster realizing he's tossed all his flowers into the river, and he's run out, and he's looking around, what flower can I toss in? And little Maria, the girl who, I can make a boat. And he tries to make a boat out of her by, picking her up and tossing her into the lake. And I'm trying to find that scene. That was missing, I guess, after the initial screening court for about 50 years before VHS came. Why do you think they took that out? Too shocking for audiences?
Well, there have been so many theories about that. Boris Karloff himself, of course, had certain reservations about the way James Whale was handling it. But I think that Whale's instincts were right, that the monster is acting innocently, although it's a violent action. And he doesn't realize what he is doing. And,
Right.
there's lovely Maria, and will she float as well? Throws her in, and then he's puzzled. He doesn't understand why she doesn't float.
Right.
And to remove that section, and then, of course, as we know, the version we were so used to seeing for decades was then a shot of Michael Mark carrying the drowned body of his daughter into the town square, and it looks like she's been sexually molested.
Which is even worse than by taking it out. So, and then with
Absolutely.
and then with the advent
Yep.
of I think near the end of VHS, I think it was the early '90s. I guess they finally decided to put the scene in, and it just cleared up everything. It made sense. You heard about the missing scene. He throws her in, thinking she's a flower, and she doesn't float, and he's all sad, and he disappears. It finally makes sense. And then when Michael Mark is carrying Maria in a great lifeless body, the actress did, where she looks like she's dead, and the whole town is screaming as they walk by. But I think that was one of the first instances of a deleted scene that no one had seen for years until, I guess, it was finally put back. So, right? I mean,
Well,
it was as expected, not as
the
shocking.
whole. Oh, absolutely. And, the thing is, too, with Universal, as we know, our great friend Curtis Harrington and his astounding one-man campaign to find and restore the old dark house. And so Universal's, if you will, taking things out, even disregard in some cases entire movies or whatever, unfortunately was not that unusual. And you had to do some digging. You had to, have real archivists come in and help reassemble these things in the way that the filmmakers intended.
But anyway, let's move on to the next one, Court. A lot of people don't know about, but it's in the novel. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1932. Mr. Hyde, as you know, doesn't care about anything. That's his demeanor. And as he's running around the streets, I guess, trying to evade police or looking for his next victim, he's running around the streets of Paris. He purposely steps on a little orphan boy's face right in the middle of the street. I once saw that still, I think on eBay once. It went for a lot of money. And he's just squashing it. And you can understand why that was taken out. It was in the book. It was a little girl in the book. But here, it's a pretty shocking scene. And I'll just show let's see, a quick shot of, well, let's see. Well, there's a still from the movie. That's not the little boy he steps on. But is this a scene you've heard of, or have you ever seen this still?
Oh, I remember seeing that still in Famous Monsters, and he's on the steps and he's looking down at the child under his feet. It was really something. And what's interesting to me is that they were going, no, that's too much. Let's pull that back. And the openly sexual stuff with Miriam Hopkins, including some, glimpses of nudity, is pretty, they were pushing the envelope of the code.
Let's talk, Court, talk about that. There's a whipping
I
scene, right? There's a whipping scene, correct?
I have never seen a cut of the movie with the whipping scene included, where she pulls her nightgown aside and, when she's trying to seduce Frederick March as Dr. Jekyll. There seems to be little bits and pieces of that they have been able to reinstate. But even now, that seems a little, wow, you're like, gee whiz, guys, you're really going for it there.
Talk about what the pre-code films were compared to maybe the post-code.
Well, I think the biggest difference, of course, was, well, first of all, there was this pretend public outcry because of what people saw as Hollywood was this Sodom and Gomorrah, and, the movies were reflecting it, and, little kids were going in and they were seeing movies like Babyface with Barbara Stanwyck, where she sleeps her way to the top. And, you see Barbara pretty, undraped in that, and Night Nurse, and all these, sexy performances from actresses like Joan Blondell, and then pushing the violence envelope, like The Shocking End of Public Enemy and things like this. And finally, they just decided, if you will, because of the outcry about the moral standards in Hollywood, it's like, no, we're going to now enforce this code, not only because they wanted to present an image of Hollywood really to calm down all the public perception of the private lives in a way, which actually in themselves weren't as crazy as everybody thought, but so that Hollywood would become a model for the American lifestyle. And they put Will Hayes in charge of it. And all the studios signed on. So goodbye, Miriam Hopkins. And then you compare the Miriam Hopkins performance as the little streetwalker falls in love, ends up with Mr. Hyde, to Ingrid Bergman's interpretation of that same character. And Ingrid, she turns on the heat, but it's not the same at all. And there's just a, if you will, toning down. And as you know, even horror movies really got hit very hard. A post-code film, and that was The Raven, got hit very hard by this with censor cuts like crazy when it was released in the UK, and that began the ban of horror movies. So in England for several years, which affected production here. So you see anything made before 1933, and it was you were going to see something. Post 33, that's when they started to try and calm things down a little bit.
Let's move on to another film which was very controversial, and of course basically a whole half of the movie was removed, and we're talking about Todd Browning's Freaks, 1932, which intact as it is today is probably one of the most shocking, crazy films ever made. All real circus freaks used, human pincushions, Siamese twins, and dwarfs. It's really scary. Even now, 70, 80 years later, it is scary as heck. And I know that the studio removed 30 minutes of footage from the film, which actually would have been nice if it was a side plot, I guess, a love interest story with two subplot characters, and that would have been nice to follow to take the ease off the ill-fated result of what happened, when the two lovers, Hercules and his mistress, try to bilk one of the dwarfs' money, and it's really shocking. But anyway, Court, we're going to talk about, well, the main one that they do at the end. They show her as a chicken. The girl who I guess cheated on him, she turned into like a chicken. But the scene that you don't see is Hercules, I guess, is trying to get away, and at the end, I guess he always sings soprano, but he sings no, he sings falsetto. But at the end, he sings soprano, which I guess infers that he was castrated. Am I right?
Yes, and the thing is so much with if you will, the Hercules plot with Alenka, and they're cheating Harry Earls, and she humiliates him, and all that stuff. Um, Todd Browning really kind of did a dry run for some of the material in Freaks in the Unknown. Uh, and there again, the strong man, and he's in that case, Joan Crawford, and she doesn't intentionally deceive Lon Chaney. But remember, there are those stills of Chaney doing like an experimental makeup that he had created as a
Jesus
half man,
Christ.
half duck.
Right.
And there's those great shots of Todd Browning, and they're figuring it out. In that case, I think Lon Chaney was wearing shoes on his hands, and it's very interesting, but it is so close to the very shocking ending of Freaks. And I know that Angelo Rosito told me that when they were getting ready to do the movie, and he had so many friends who were in the carnival business, and of course other little people and whatever, and they kind of leaned on him a little bit to try, he and Harry Earls both, to recruit other folks into the movie, and to see, okay, who will actually want to do this. And to their surprise, Johnny Eck and Schlitzie and all the they all came on board. And of course, the very famous Siamese twins, the sisters, they came on, and it was quite a little victory for the film to have these, really recognized circus acts in this movie, and they weren't feeling exploited. They weren't feeling taken advantage of at all.
Shocking ending to Freaks, which is always still legendary, isn't to this day. Let's move on to another film that had a deleted scene, probably one of the most famous deleted scenes, if in fact it was ever filmed, Court. And I think this is one of your favorites. And of course, we're talking about King Kong versus the spider down in the cave, that infamous giant spider. Was that film? I know everybody, you can blame Forey for that. Here's the spider in the film, and everybody in Famous Monsters saw it and they believed it. Was that scene ever filmed, Court, or was that just the photo that
As
exists?
As far as I know, no. There's always been the theory that some of the creatures created for that scene by, Willis O'Brien and Marcel Delgado, and even Pete Peterson, were then later used as the demonic worms and horrible insects in the dissension scene in Black Scorpion. And I don't know that. I mean, it would make sense since it was the same guys doing the animation. But I don't know. We've seen the production sketches and heard so much about that particular moment. I truly don't know how far any animation was ever done on it. Um, to do the animation and then cut the scene, that would have been a lot of money, and I don't think they were going to spend that. But of course, within King Kong, there were so many cuts that were made with Kong eating the natives, grinding them under his feet, stomping on them with his feet, and one of the, you know, I'm sorry, ladies, but it does not pay to be a brunette in this film when Khan pulls that poor woman out of bed, looks at her, holds her up by her feet, and looks at her, and then just throws her to the ground, uh, 30 stories down or whatever it is, because it's not Fay Ray.
Okay, let's I guess we'll go back to Frankenstein court, and it's when reviving the monster in a fit of delusional rage. When he does revive him, Dr. Frankenstein alters the famous words, "Now I know what it is to be a god." And I guess, for religious reasons or for some reason, it was taken out. And like the Maria scene, her drowning was put back in. So you think just mentioning you're just like a god, or know like to be how to be a god. It was taboo back then, Court.
Well, no, actually, Jay, you're giving the film a bit more credit because you added the A. In
Oh,
fact, what Colin Clive says is, "Now I know what it feels like to be God." So that was, and of course, the cut, they just cut the line. So there's a jump cut in the film, famously, that we all were just so used to. And he's there, and Edward Van Sloan, Frankenstein, take it easy, or whatever it is he's saying to it.
let's move along to as we cover deleted scenes in classic horror films, and I guess before all right, let's talk about. Well, on Bride of Frankenstein, might as well go to the sequel as I look to my notes. One quick scene where the monster abducts Elizabeth and takes her to his cave, and obviously, I think that's all cut. And then Pretorius goes, "You can talk to your wife through this device. It's not called a phone, but here it is." But I
Yeah,
guess when the monster abducts her and throws her in the cave for the bride abduction, that scene was cut. Why do you think that was? I think it's a very scenic, noirish looking shot.
I know. I always felt that probably was just a matter of like so many cuts within Bride of Frankenstein, including Dwight Fry as Carl goes on that murder spree. All of that was removed, and I think that honestly, all that stuff probably was just for time because it was a lengthy movie for a horror movie. As you know, when they reshot the ending, and that's one of the most famous gaffes I think in American movies because they reshot it, but they still use that long shot where you see Colin Clive in the laboratory when it's blowing up, when in fact he and his gorgeous Elizabeth have already escaped.
So let's move on. Let's go backwards to Phantom of the Opera, 1925, silent film, great film with Lon Chaney Sr., one of his great roles. Of course, the plot, and that's about abduction and taking away someone who you can't have and keeping them in the catacombs, and the great unmasking scene. There's so much. So on this particular episode, we're not going to go into the plots of all these movies, just basically what the deleted scenes were. But there's three of them in Phantom of the Opera Court, and maybe you can tell us about them. The first one, where it was the Phantom. I think I don't have any of the scenes, of course, but where the Phantom plays the violin in the graveyard, which I think is pretty cool. The Phantom throws the skulls at Raoul, and then the resurrection of
Yeah,
Lazarus. I've never seen that. What was that, Court?
I have actually never seen that either. And the problem, Jay, is for even remember for years that spectacular, and it was one of the color sequences of the Phantom on the roof overlooking Mary Philbin and Norman Carey, and with that red cape, billowing behind him, and he looks absolutely supernatural uh, up there. So many of these scenes, of course, the Red Death was the most famous when it was finally restored, but Phantom went through so many changes from when it was made, and Lon Chaney didn't get along with the director Rupert Julian, so he was directing material. There were in comedy inserts that were later done for that early first sound version that Universal released. Then some of that stuff was in there and then pulled out, other things trimmed, other things brought back. And, it was just this kind of patchwork of all of these different versions of the film that existed before you and I ever had a chance to experience it on public television or wherever it was, because was made in 1925. But that is one of those movies that had such an astonishingly checkered history, just in its making. So, of course, I think there are moments still scattered to the wind that we have not yet seen.
So let's move on to another one. 1932, Cord. This is another personal favorite of yours, and we were actually talking before the show about Murders in the Rue Morgue and how a new, European 4K cut of this reveals some of this information or some new things that you saw, like the better, more realistic cutaway shots of Eric the gorilla and stuff like that. It had its fair share of cut scenes. Lugosi, after killing and biopsying the hooker Arlene Francis, bends down and prays, and that's not in the film, is it, Cord?
No, it's amazing that when this new version, because of the efforts of Tim Lucas and some others, what they did is they went back and recut the movie, reordered the scenes the way director Robert Flory had originally intended it, and then found things like these remarkable cutaways of Eric that I had never seen before, including one where it's an impact with the real gorilla getting shot on the roof. And the scenes with Arlene Francis as the girl of the streets, totally different context. And when Lugosi is in front of her and she is dying, and of course he says, "Your blood is as black as your sins because you had syphilis." it's it's just riveting and so different because of the way the film is constructed. And we see all of this Lugosi prowling the streets looking for these women of the night, then killing them, and the bodies then being pulled out of the Thames. All of this is going on before we ever see Dr. Miracle in the sideshow. So everything has a totally different context. And it's like watching an entirely new movie. It's wonderful. And why Universal screwed around with it to the degree that they did is anybody's guess.
Yeah, no, when you told me about this, I had to go, I'm gonna have to look for it and get this 4K version. And I advise all of you to look for Murders in the Rue Morgue. There's some hidden, Easter eggs in there that you'll be blown away from. Oh, you get both versions of the film, I guess. And that,
Yes, you do.
I'm sorry, you told me that this new version is the Easter egg.
Yes, it is actually in the still gallery. You really have to hunt around for it. But wow, it was just incredible. And you know something else, John Huston, who it was one of his earliest screenplays, uh, always said, "Well, I tried to capture the spirit of Poe." And I just thought that was just kind of arrogance and just puffery on John Huston's part until I saw the movie properly put together because he did write the shooting script. Oh my gosh, he's right. So a salute to John Huston also to see this movie in its proper way.
Oh yeah, definitely one of those great revelations that come out once in a while. We're surprised with something new that we haven't seen and so crystal clear. So
Oh,
let's move
gorgeous.
on, Court. I guess this is The Wolfman. Great film, of course. Lon Chaney Jr. is Larry Talbot. And great film. Don't have to tell you anything about it. Obviously, guy's bitten by Bela the Gypsy, turns into a wolf. He kills a few people in the village, and no one believes him. And when the moon is full and bright, he turns into a werewolf and starts killing people. And Ralph Bellamy, is I guess the head policeman is looking for him, and his dad Claude Rains doesn't believe about the curse. It's just a great film. That has absolutely nothing to do with the scene that was deleted. And when I first heard, and it's kind of a well-known thing in classic horror lore, that there's a deleted scene, and there's a photo of it that I'm going to show, of Lon Chaney Jr. wrestling a freaking bear. Now, when I first heard about this, I thought, oh, a little scene of maybe the Wolfman, so Lon Chaney as the Wolfman prowling around, and he comes across maybe a wild bear or a circus bear, and they fight and they roll around, and he tears the bear's neck out and too gory, right? We have to delete that. No, the scene is Lon among the gypsies and townspeople wrestling a bear like on a bed. I bet I could wrestle this bear. Tell me, Court, the reasoning and the story behind Lon Chaney Jr. wrestling a bear and why it was deleted.
I always wondered about the deletion because the idea was that the bear is on a chain in the gypsy camp. The chain snaps, and Larry Talbot wrestles the bear so people could escape. And that moment, also, I think they were charging, to wrestle the bear or something, and then it goes too far. But what they wanted, what the whole idea behind Kurt Siodmak's scene was to show that Larry Talbot's animal instincts were overtaking him,
Mm.
and that was becoming more and more animalistic, even without completely transforming into the Wolfman. Now, of course, when this scene was shot, it's one of the most famous behind the stories of making the movie. The bear did escape, and the trainer could not corral it in time. So everybody was running hither and yon, and Lon Chaney reached out for Evie Anchors. He went up a tree to pull her up, and she thought he was screwing around with her again, so she resists, and he jumps up the tree, and one of the electricians grabs her under the arms and pulled her up because that bear was following her right across the soundstage.
And I think the guy who sings Fado Di Fado Day is in that scene. So I don't know. That's very interesting. Or maybe they just used him in the background.
Yes.
But anyway, we've got a couple more films to go, and these include, The Mummy, 1932. And I think it has probably one of the best reincarnation flashback sequences ever, never added to a film. I don't know if it was ever in the original cut, Court, but for some reason, I don't know, because I guess you've heard rumors Zita Johann and Carl Freund didn't get along on the set. I don't know. I doubt they would destroy a film and its flashback sequences just to get back at her, or maybe it
Oh,
was,
really did not do it.
wait, let me get your opinion in a second, or maybe it was time constraints. But I just feel it's one of the biggest travesties in Universal history from the stills that I have seen. This beautiful flashbacks of when Princess Akhenaten went back into previous lives while looking in a tranquil mirror. Talk about that as I show the scenes that were deleted. Why were they deleted, and how much you think that would have added to the story? I think it would have added a lot.
I think it would have added a lot too, because the thing is, the Mummy is at its core, of course, a love story, reincarnation love story, and with all these great parallels, of course, to Dracula. The thing is, Jake, one of the relationship between Zita Johann and Carl Freund, the director, was horrible, and he would keep challenging her in bizarre ways, including, I want to shoot this next scene with you in the nude, and all this type of stuff. And she wouldn't rise to the bait. She'd say, okay, let's do it. So every time he threw down the gauntlet, she kind of gave it right back to him. So she was a very strong lady. And I don't know that the personal animosity would have played into the cutting of the scene as much as, if you will, Universal looking at the movie and thinking, okay, we have Karloff being resurrected as the Mummy in that incredibly brief scene where you never even see him head to toe walking ever. But is this a horror movie? And does this does did this scene make it too much of a romance? I don't know.
Let's look at some of these stills. From the first one I just showed was when he tells her, lie here, O royal daughter of the sun, go back life by life, and as your soul passes through each incarnation, that life will be blotted out of the records of Osiris, king of the dead. So she looks in there, and then we are privy to seeing her past lives. And the first one is where she plays a 13th century lady of the castle, and I'm going to show some stills. So these were all in the film, and they were edited out. I mean, this is just great looking. Looks like Macbeth by by Orson Welles. But I mean, these great shots of her as different people that kind of show, I guess, the lives she led and how tortured she was going through the centuries that led her, to being with Imhotep.
Well, you also have to wonder, because they did spend the time and the money to shoot this material with Zeta, was the idea that in fact they were taking too much time away from Boris Karloff?
Oh, that's possible, absolutely. In that first scene, she was playing a 13th century lady of the castle, and then in another one, a great scene. I could just imagine the dramatic acting. She plays a Christian. She plays. No, that's another scene. She plays an 8th century princess who commits suicide. I mean, just pretty dramatic stuff. And I guess it could take away from the mummy aspect, but I think it's great to just look back at her various incarnations and reincarnations through the centuries. It just would have added such another great element.
And jumping back for a second, it's interesting. We were talking about these scenes, and even scenes that we've seen in some of the other films that were cut, but they did exist sometimes, like in the Wolfman wrestling the bear and things like that, in the trailers, but then not in the feature itself.
Right, I guess Ghost of Frankenstein. Remember, he's on fire,
Yep.
and it's like, where did that still come from? And then here's another still from the reincarnation mirror, where she does play a Christian martyr. And it's just, I don't know, it just adds another element to it. It just would have been nice as opposed to mummy, 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 and, you know, I don't allow anyone to touch me. It just would have been nice just to have something different besides just Lugosi's, weary eyes and stuff like that. But that's just me. I love when you can add another element to a film. But, I mean, this is a different time and era, Court. I mean, this was the 30s, so who knows what the studios were thinking. But I just think this would have been great to keep intact.
But but again, did Freund make some deliberate decisions there, or probably? My guess is no, because no filmmaker wants to see his work shredded. However, if the question came up from Maurice Pivar, whoever was running the editorial department at that time, I think it was him, said, how about cutting these scenes with Zeta? I doubt that Freund would have fought that too hard because he disliked her so much.
I guess. And then the final where she scene in the reincarnation pool is she plays an 18th century lady of the French court, kind of like a Marie Antoinette. I mean, just great little cycles of history going back to, well, we kind of learn about her background before, Imhotep or Ardith Bey tries to make her do the ultimate sacrifice. Just 1 second of spilt blood for an eternity, with Imhotep. But anyway, I just think these are classy scenes that would have added to the movie. That's just my personal opinion. But very famous reincarnation pool scenes that I think would still hold up to today. So now let's go. We'll have a little discussion about Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. It's been debated, argued, talked about, and no one ends up the winner. And especially people who don't know the history of it. People are like, oh, he's... The test audiences were all the audiences who watched it were all laughing back when they saw it because they didn't understand why is he speaking with an accent and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, there's a whole setup of why the monster is stumbling around. He's obviously blind because in Ghost of Frankenstein he lost his sight because, the brain transplant didn't work well, remember? Bomber, I can't see. Well, that's why he's blind in the follow-up movie, and the reason why he's right.
I cannot see.
What good is eyes that cannot see? Exactly, Court. And then Igor speaks like, "No, this isn't Catherine. I am Igor." That's why he spoke like freaking Igor in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. So they just should have just kept it all. These audiences, unfortunately, influenced. I guess when they check, they did those surveys with the card. And the studio or the Lemleys got back to him and said, okay, we got to cut all the dialogue and all the scenes of him talking, but it's no, it made sense. Him talking like Igor and stumbling around made sense. He was blind and he had the brain of Igor. Am I right, Court?
No, you're absolutely right. And there are a couple of factors working here. What's interesting is in House of Frankenstein. There's actually a little summation of Frankenstein meets the Wolfman and dialogue between Boris Karloff and Lon Chaney. So there's no mistake, no B. And it's kind of funny that they did that, but I'm sure that was a reaction to Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. Now, here is the thing. The voice of how all these events unfolded belongs to Kurt Siodmak. Kurt Siodmak was sometimes not the best friend of the truth. And he had a way of spinning, which one of the things that made him a great writer. But even when you read Lugosi's dialogue in that wonderful published version of the script, the dialogue it isn't good. It's not relevant to the ghost of Frankenstein. The monster, the chance to be enraged and say, they did me a trick. Now I am blind, and all that stuff, it would have worked great. And, the monster's bent on revenge like everybody else because he's really pissed off.
But there is one scene, I guess, where they're sitting. There was two scenes. There's one where they're both sitting in the frozen snow. They're like, do you remember the time, Lon, when we were cooking hot dogs over a stove? Obviously maybe some of that dialogue, as you said, could have been, removed and stuff. Or, Chaney said, and I turned into a wolf, and Lugosi says, you're kidding. It's not something the monster would say. So maybe that could have been, here's the scene I'm talking about. Maybe that could have been exercised out. But I just think, it's all explained at the end of Ghost and Frankenstein. I've been telling anybody who would listen, I go to the highest hill, mountaintop. I keep saying, hey, his eyes didn't take to the surgery, so he's blind. That's why he stumbles. And he has Igor's vocal cords because he is now Igor. I just don't understand how those audiences just didn't see that, or at least a setup of that. And then there's the other scene of, have you seen that one, Court, where Bella or the monster is in a blanket, like they're about to read, bedtime stories to each other. But I always felt that was a missed opportunity. And as I said, this is debated on YouTube and in Facebook pages. And there are people who say, oh, I'm glad they cut Lugosi's dialogue. I'm not. I would have preferred to have seen it.
Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is so gorgeously made. It's so beautifully photographed by George Robinson. Still has the scariest moment, certainly in the 1940s Universal canon, with Chaney's resurrection. That movie has got so much tremendous stuff, including Alona Massey. And man, if she ain't making your blood boil, you need to see Dr. Frankenstein because you've got some problems.
We know how much you're jonesing for the little Ilona Massey, Court.
Oh man. But that's the thing. There's so many glories in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, and it's so well directed. And the performances, again, Lon Chaney Jr. looks better in that film than I think in any other Universal horror movie. Even the Wolfman.
Well, that opening scene, Court, where the two grave robbers, that's one of the spookiest, eeriest shot 5-minute sequences.
Absolutely fantastic. And the thing is, too, Patrick Knowles as Dr. Mannering and is wonderful, and Dennis Hoey kind of repeating his Inspector Lestrade performance. Of course, Roy William Neal was his primary director in the Sherlock Holmes series. But it's, again, just wonderful. And the things with Maria Ospinskaya and Rex Evans and of course, there's old Dwight Fry, God bless him. He said he'd blow up the dam. It's just wonderful. And that miniature work is great.
Right. Let's blow it up.
Yeah,
Right. It's either Rex Evans or Dwight. They're the two, I guess, dam blowers. And of course, Jenny Williams meets her fate. Faye Helm. So unfortunately, she wrong place, wrong time. But anyway, Court, I've got a special one to mention to you that I found. Tell me if you've seen it. I'm sure you've seen this one. But there's a scene in Bride of Frankenstein. Well, there's no scene. This is just a publicity shot where the monster steps on an old man's back. I've actually found this on the internet. Have you seen this still? And why is that not in the movie? That is just crazy. Breaking the guy's back with
that
his foot.
yeah, rampaging through the village, and I don't know, and because I've seen that still many times, and as you know, in within Bride, because of James Whale's irreverence and his sense of humor, uh, they had to change. Originally, I believe that Karloff actually knocked over a statue of Jesus in the cemetery, and they changed it to a saint, and then he goes down into the crypt and all of that stuff, because the religious iconography in the movie, uh, James Whale does, he makes it basically very Catholic, especially in the scenes with O.P. Hagee, and where the image of the cross is the last thing you see in the film, and in that scenes with him with the monster in the hut. So it's interesting that I'm sure that Whale was kind of playing it fast and loose with some of that stuff, and when he did, out came the scissors. So this was, I think he made his compromises for that stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, always we've talked about in past episodes. Great background people, from the writers, to the set people, to the designers, who all work together endlessly in very short time periods. These movies are made on anywhere from 3 weeks to 6 weeks, and just to put together such great, classy films as opposed to Poverty Row, which made in a couple of days or a week. But they all worked on the same sets. It's amazing how a little bit more money would make a production much better than working, for Sam Katzman as opposed to the Lemleys.
Certainly during the war years and whatever, why certain films like Murders in the Rue Morgue or The Mummy were just taken apart and reassembled in the way that they were remains the mystery, without the personnel sitting here in front of us to tell us, okay, justify yourself. Why the hell did you do this?
Yeah, the decisions of the studios are always questionable. Why they do it, you rack your brain. Books are written about it. Why this, why that? I guess maybe it's just they're a victim of the times. 30s and 40s was a different era. Of course, today you can get away with showing everything. There's no cutting away.
Carl Lemley was very conscious of a quote unquote family appeal or whatever was going on. You look at Warner, where one of the major characters is a heroin addict, and all of this stuff going on, and the implied nudity, and everything. It's like, whoa, baby, they're just going nuts over there. And of course, this is all edging into the pre-code era. But it's funny that, and of course, they were shooting in color. But it's funny that Warner Brothers just said, and they just went for it. Universal was being, at times a little timid, particularly after the code came in, except for the Raven.
Right. Well, Dragonwyck and Bedlam, two great examples of movies that just went way far,
Yep.
as far as violence and drug use and stuff for that time.
This has been so great, Jay, and I really do appreciate this opportunity, and this opportunity has opened up the gates for other things. So this has really been wonderful, and you're a great friend, and I really appreciate it.
So, for the great Courtney Joyner, I'm Jay Jennings. I want to thank you for joining us. We'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks, Court.
Thank you, Jay.